In the secluded foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, where wilderness meets solitude, Jaime, a compassionate woman living near a wooded area, noticed a wild bobcat regularly appearing near her home. Understanding its cautious nature, she quietly began leaving out food to help the animal. As winter tightened, the bobcat's visits grew more regular, a silent acknowledgement passing between woman and wildcat. But one January morning, after a devastating storm, everything changed. A desperate sound scratched at Jaime's door. On her porch stood the bobcat, but she wasn't alone. At her feet lay a tiny injured kitten, brought deliberately to the human she had learned to cautiously observe. What would you do if a desperate mother bobcat arrives at your doorstep to seek human help during a blizzard? This is the story of an extraordinary trust forged in the wilderness, a silent plea that crossed the divide between species in a choice that would change lives forever. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The morning sun filtered through the tall pines surrounding Jaime Carter's secluded cabin in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. At 42, Jaime had left behind a successful but unfulfilling career as a corporate attorney in Charlotte to pursue her lifelong dream of wildlife photography. 3 years into her new life, she had found the peace she'd been seeking in this isolated sanctuary, where her nearest neighbor was 2 miles down a winding dirt road. Jaime's morning ritual remained unchanged regardless of weather or season. She would rise with the sun, brew strong coffee, and sit on her wraparound porch observing the forest awaken. Her camera always rested beside her rocking chair, ready to capture anything of interest. This routine had yielded some of her most prized photographs: foxes with their kits, raccoon families, and countless birds. It was during one such morning in early October, as the mountains exploded with autumn colors, that Jaime first spotted the bobcat. The wildcat appeared at the edge of the clearing, its tawny coat speckled with black spots, blending perfectly with the fallen leaves. Jaime froze mid-sip, careful not to startle the creature. The encounter lasted less than a minute, but it filled her with indescribable joy. Bobcats were notoriously shy creatures, rarely seen by humans despite their presence in the Appalachian wilderness. Over the next weeks, the bobcat appeared repeatedly, always at dawn, always keeping a cautious distance. Jaime began noticing patterns: how it emerged from the same cluster of rhododendrons, how it would pause to scent the air, how its ears would prick at the slightest sound. "You're a beautiful girl, aren't you?" Jaime whispered after observing for nearly 2 weeks. The animal's size and movement suggested it was female, possibly a young adult. Through her telephoto lens, Jaime could see the cat was lean, perhaps too lean. The approaching winter would be hard, especially for predators if prey was scarce. Making a decision that went against conventional wildlife management wisdom but followed her heart, Jaime began leaving out small amounts of food, raw chicken mainly, at the edge of the clearing. She consulted via email with Dr. Eleanor Martin, a wildlife biologist from the State University. Limited supplemental feeding isn't ideal, but likely won't create dependency if done correctly. Dr. Martin had written back, "Keep it minimal and irregular, and absolutely maintain distance at all times." Jaime followed this advice meticulously. Sometimes she would leave food, sometimes not. She never attempted to approach the bobcat or encourage it closer. Their relationship was one of mutual respect and distance. As November turned to December and the first snowfalls blanketed the mountains, the bobcat's visits became more regular. Though still cautious, it would linger longer in the clearing, sometimes sitting in the weak winter sunshine. Once it even remained when Jaime stepped onto the porch, simply watching her with those intense amber eyes before unhurriedly retreating. Jaime began noticing smaller tracks alongside the bobcats in the snow. She suspected the wildcat was a mother, though she never saw the kitten. The bobcat wouldn't risk bringing her young near a human, exactly as it should be. January brought a particularly severe winter storm, over 2 feet of snow and dangerous wind chills. For 3 days, Jaime remained inside, feeding her wood stove constantly against the howling wind. She worried about the bobcat and her kitten, hoping they had found adequate shelter. When the storm finally passed, Jaime waded through deep snow to place food in the small wooden shelter she'd constructed. Fresh tracks appeared the following morning, but something was different. They seemed erratic, not the usual direct approach and retreat. And there was only one set of prints, no sign of the smaller tracks. "Where's your little one?" Jaime murmured, studying the area through her binoculars. The answer came the following morning in a way Jaime could never have anticipated. She was at her desk when a strange sound from the porch caught her attention. A deliberate scratching at the door. Moving cautiously to the window, Jaime peered out and gasped. The bobcat was on her porch, something that had never happened before. But what truly shocked her was what lay at the wildcat's feet. A small, bedraggled form she instantly recognized as a bobcat kitten, its fur matted with snow and ice. "Oh my God," Jaime whispered, her heart racing. The mother bobcat looked directly at her through the window, those amber eyes seeming to communicate a desperate plea. Then with a soft chuff, the wildcat backed away several feet, still watching intently. Jaime's mind raced. This went against everything she knew about wild animal behavior. Something was terribly wrong. Opening the door slowly, Jaime saw the kitten more clearly. It lay motionless, except for shallow breathing. One hind leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and dried blood matted the fur around a visible wound. The mother bobcat remained at the porch's edge, her body tense, ears flattened, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to abandon her injured offspring. "You want me to help?" Jaime realized aloud. "You're trusting me to help your baby." The realization brought tears to her eyes. This wild creature, following some unfathomable instinct, had brought her injured kitten to the only source of potential help in miles. After calling Dr. Martin, who confirmed the unprecedented nature of this behavior and provided instructions for safe containment, Jaime prepared herself with thick leather gloves, a soft towel, and a pet carrier. She placed food at the far end of the porch to distract the mother momentarily. When Jaime emerged from the cabin and moved toward the injured kitten, the mother bobcat growled low in her throat but did not attack. Instead, she paced anxiously, her gaze alternating between her kitten and the approaching human. "It's okay," Jaime murmured, though she knew the words meant nothing to the wildcat. "I'm going to help your little one, I promise." With trembling hands, Jaime gently wrapped the towel around the small, limp form. It offered no resistance. Its eyes closed, breathing labored. The mother bobcat made a strangled, yowling sound that broke Jaime's heart, but still didn't interfere. "I'll take good care of him, I promise," Jaime said, tears streaming down her face as she carefully lifted the kitten and placed him in the carrier. The mother bobcat followed a few steps, making distressed sounds, then stopped, torn between following her kitten and retreating to safety. "I'll bring him back," Jaime said, fully aware the promise might be impossible to keep. The 3-hour drive to the Blue Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was tense and treacherous. Ice patches made driving hazardous, and throughout the journey, Jaime spoke softly to the carrier, where the kitten remained motionless. "Stay with me, little one," she urged. "Your mama trusted me with you. Don't make me break my promise to her." Staff were waiting when Jaime arrived. The kitten, confirmed to be male and about 5 months old, was immediately taken for examination and emergency treatment. "He has a compound fracture of the leg," Dr. Whitaker, the veterinarian, explained 2 hours later. "There's also signs of hypothermia and malnutrition, but he's young and fairly strong." "Will he survive?" Jaime asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I believe so, yes, but his recovery will be lengthy, and there's a significant question about whether he can be released back into the wild after such serious injury and extended human contact." Jaime thought of the mother bobcat, likely still patrolling near her cabin. "I promised his mother I'd bring him back." Dr. Whitaker's expression softened with sympathy. "I understand, but we have to consider what's best for the kitten's long-term welfare." Over the following weeks, Jaime divided her time between her cabin and the wildlife center, making the 3-hour drive every few days to check on the kitten's progress. She'd started calling him Milo. He was responding well to treatment, his fractured leg healing properly, his weight increasing steadily. But despite careful rehabilitation protocols to minimize human imprinting, it became increasingly clear that Milo's young age at the time of injury, combined with extensive human intervention, was affecting his development. While he retained many wild instincts, he showed none of the fear response toward humans necessary for successful reintroduction to the wild. By mid-March, the Wildlife Center staff made their final assessment. The consensus is clear, Dr. Martin told Jaime during a conference call. Milo has developed a level of habituation to humans that makes him unsuitable for release. Even though Jaime had been preparing for this outcome, hearing it officially stated sent a wave of sadness through her. There are several wildlife sanctuaries with appropriate facilities, Dr. Martin began, but Dr. Whitaker interrupted gently. Or, there's your application to the Home Rehabilitation Program. Jaime had submitted paperwork weeks earlier, simultaneously beginning required coursework and consulting with contractors about building a suitable enclosure on her property. Your application was approved conditionally, Dr. Martin explained, subject to completion of advanced certification and construction of an enclosure meeting all specifications. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur. Jaime threw herself into completing certification requirements and overseeing construction of Milo's enclosure, a spacious area incorporating natural features like trees, rocks, and a small artificial stream. Throughout this period, the mother bobcat continued to visit Jaime's cabin, though less frequently as spring advanced. She no longer approached the porch, but would often appear at the clearing's edge, watching with those inscrutable amber eyes before melting back into the forest. During these visits, Jaime would speak softly from the porch. "He's doing well. His leg is healed. He's growing strong." The words helped Jaime process her complex feelings, the gratitude she felt toward this magnificent creature who had trusted her, the sadness that she couldn't fulfill her promise exactly as intended, and the hope that her alternative solution might still honor that trust. In late April, with the mountain laurel beginning to bloom and Milo's enclosure finally complete, Jaime made the journey to bring Milo home. The young bobcat, now nearly 8 months old and considerably larger than when she'd first bundled him into the carrier that snowy January morning, traveled in a specialized transport crate. The moment of release into his new enclosure was tense. Jaime stood back as Dr. Whitaker opened the crate door. For several minutes, Milo remained inside. Then, with cautious deliberation, he emerged. His movements were fluid, the former injury evident only in slightly different fur coloration over the healed wound. "He's accepting it," Dr. Whitaker said quietly. "This is a very good sign." It was nearly a week after Milo's arrival when the mother finally appeared again. Jaime spotted her at dusk, emerging from the rhododendrons at the forest edge. But this evening, instead of lingering at the clearing's boundary, the bobcat moved with purpose toward the enclosure. Jaime watched from her porch, camera forgotten, as the mother bobcat approached the enclosure cautiously, circling once before stopping at the section nearest the forest. Through the specialized mesh, she and Milo came face to face for the first time in nearly 4 months. What passed between them, Jaime could not say. Both cats remained motionless, amber eyes locked in silent communication. After several minutes, the mother sat on her haunches. Inside, Milo mirrored the position. Tears welled in Jaime's eyes as she witnessed this reunion. Different from what she had promised that desperate January morning, but perhaps no less meaningful. The mother had brought her injured child to the only help available, and against all odds, that child had survived and thrived. As darkness fell, the mother bobcat finally rose and retreated to the forest edge. But she did not disappear. Instead, she settled in a patch of mountain laurel with a clear view of the enclosure, her form visible in the growing moonlight. The pattern continued in the following weeks. The mother would visit regularly, sometimes approaching the enclosure for that silent communion with Milo, sometimes simply observing from a distance. She never approached the cabin directly again, maintaining the cautious distance appropriate to her wild nature. But she seemed to accept, perhaps even approve of, the arrangement Jaime had created. By midsummer, as Milo matured into his adult size, the mother's visits became less frequent, consistent with the natural separation that would have occurred had they both remained wild. But she did not disappear entirely. Even a year later, trail cameras would occasionally capture images of the female bobcat patrolling the property edge, sometimes pausing near the enclosure before continuing on her solitary way. For Jaime, this ongoing connection was the final confirmation that she had, in her own way, kept her promise. She had not returned Milo directly to his mother or to the wild, but she had created a space where he could live safely while maintaining some connection to his origins. She had honored the trust placed in her that snowy January morning when a desperate mother had defied her instincts to seek help from a human. In the end, the greatest gift hadn't been Milo himself, though Jaime treasured his presence. The true gift had been the trust of a wild creature, a trust that had transformed Jaime's understanding of her place in the natural world and deepened her commitment to protecting the delicate balance between human existence and wildlife conservation in these ancient mountains they all called home.